In spring ball at press conferences, we can glean a lot out of things that are constants, right? Obviously, you hear a lot about the star players making plays. Those are constants. Anything that you have coaches saying and the players saying that are the same, except for something maybe that is, just the perception that they want you to believe. Still, those are still constants. But one way to kind of tell if you're not gleaning the inside info directly from someone at practices as to who is really that next crop is to hear those names constantly. So we are going to get into 8 guys that are younger, essentially, who have been constantly mentioned by players, staff, all of the above that are exceeding expectations in spring ball. We're going to do that on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Thursday. We are back and doing it after I've dealt with my maladies. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground. Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group, was back on the ground in El Glick Fieldhouse today for yet another player press conference. And that got me thinking, because we just keep hearing some of the same names over and over, guys who are really impressing so far in spring ball. We always have to preface, sometimes they're trying to make fetch happen, right? Again, no offense to Donovan Jeter or Josh Ross, but those were 2 guys that were spoken of a little too highly, and the expectations that, I think a lot of people didn't really necessarily believe the expectations heaped upon them, because it was like Josh Ross is faster and a harder hitter than Devin Bush. He's even better than Devin Bush in year 2, and I think a lot of people looked at that and said, well, that's kind of hard to do. Donovan Jeter was spoken of as Mo Hurst 2.0, same kind of deal. Hard to live up to those expectations. That's not a slam on those 2 guys. It's just that's kind of what that was. That's not what this is, right? Pretty much every press conference we ask every single guy who's impressed you that maybe we don't know about, and the same names keep popping up in one way or the other. So we're gonna get into the 8 here. So let's start with Eno ETA, who's cross-training between edge and defensive tackle. We've talked about him on this show before, obviously, but Eno ETA seems like he has taken an impressive jump. Like, it would be shocking if he isn't like a big impact player this year, because he seems to be the guy that is named more than anyone. And it's interesting at 300 pounds. That makes sense that they'd move him inside, but he's tall as well. So he's a guy that absolutely could wreak havoc one way or another. Usually you see edge rushers and defensive tackles take, just like the wide receiver position, you see them take a biggest step in year 2. Usually you don't see, every now and again you see a year 1 guy, but it's pretty rare. That's why, especially at inside, Mason Graham was kind of surprising, but then Kenneth Grant wasn't. Kenneth Grant didn't do really anything in his freshman year. And that's why I was telling anyone who would listen in the preseason last year, watch out for Kenneth Grant. Everyone was talking about Mason Graham, and I still, I think Kenneth Grant is, it's hard to pick between the 2, right? They're both just absolutely dynamic. The other one is kind of surprising, and it's funny because it feels to me like he's been around a lot longer than he has been. I keep on thinking of him as a 2019 guy, but he's 2021, so he's going into his senior year. So it's not like he's been necessarily around quite as long as I thought, because it kind of feels like, man, this guy hasn't made it yet. It's probably not going to happen. Then again, Mike Barrett exists, so that's kind of maybe the exception to the rule, but that tells you that isn't how things always go. But TJ Guy has gotten a lot of publicity, and he got mentioned again today by, so we got both Derek Moore and Ernie Hausman, and TJ Guy got some mention there. And it seems like anytime we talk to anyone that knows anything about the edge rushers, they say something really positive about TJ Guy. Derek Moore did today. I think that's some legit hype. I think he is certainly on the path to seeing some major playing time finally. It's a Don Brown special, so it's he didn't get to play under Don Brown, but he's Massachusetts with a 3-star. but maybe take him a little bit longer to kind of get in the mix. But at the same time, when we saw him a little bit in his freshman year, I think back to that Maryland game, picture I used often of Talia Tagovailoa was of a TJ Guy with his arms around him. So he's had some flashes. They just might not be as spectacular as some of the other guys we've seen. I'll lump these next two together. Samaj Morgan and Fred Moore. Here's the problem with this. They get mentioned, but there aren't many other options. But nonetheless, we keep on hearing their names pop up as guys who are really standing out. I feel like we're hearing more about Samaj and Fred than we are Tyler Morris. Samaj is obviously a unique character. Tyler Morris, and what he talked about is you need to be more than just a quick game guy. Sounds like he's taken that to heart. Frederick Moore, who's more of a 6'1", 6'2", he's the closest Michigan has to a bigger receiver threat downfield. It sounds like he's really rounding into form, as you would expect, as we say often on this show. You see wide receivers start to become productive members of society in year two. Usually not year one. Usually it's year two. Samaj Morgan's a little bit ahead of schedule. Frederick Moore sounds like he is on schedule. This one is a known name. Obviously, all these guys are known by anyone who pays attention closely, but Miles Hinton, the left tackle, who is a former 5-star, transferred in last year, started the season as the starter, and did not finish the season that way. And he's the only one returning of those who was meant to be a starter last year, who was on the offensive line. He's leaned out. We've heard a lot of things about how difficult he is to go up against. I just feel like there's a little bit of hype surrounding him, and he seems to be the anchor of an offensive line that's going to look completely new. Alex Orji, obviously the quarterback. This was pointed out, I think, by Chris Breiler, the winged helmet, and he's 100% accurate. Whenever asked about the quarterbacks, and now keep in mind, Jack Tuttle is mostly sidelined with injury. It's never like, yeah, man, Davis Warren's really been putting on, or Jaden Denegal's just been making some crazy throws, or Jaden Davis he looks the part, right? It's always led with Alex Orji did blank, and it's never followed by any negative news. So that tells you that he seems to be the guy who's kind of leading. And then you see the video that came out from practice that's been kind of circulating today, and he runs in for a touchdown and then goes and hits the punching bag a bit, and people have been making it into a meme. But Alex Orji, there's a reason why I've been telling you if they go with someone on the roster, it feels to me like it'll be him. Jack Tuttle, I think, will have something to say about that once he is in full health. He doesn't need a spring ball as much as maybe some of the others because he's been around 18 of them. Starting back in the war and all of that. But Alex Orji's the guy there. The next two and last two we have come from the defensive backfield. We'll start with DJ Waller, who seems to be the obvious choice to start opposite Will Johnson right now. He, just like Orji at the quarterback position, anytime it's like who's looked good back there, whether it's asking Tyler Morris day before yesterday. I lost a day yesterday pretty much just by being sick. But like anytime that it's who's difficult to go up against or who's making strides, who next to you is looking good. It's DJ Waller that constantly gets mentioned. His size gets mentioned, his speed, it is all of that stuff. Seems like he's got what's going on in between the ears, which is really important. That's the important thing. I think that's what's kind of precluding some other guys from necessarily getting as involved as you hope. Guys who have everything else going on for them is that it sometimes takes a while to connect the dots. I remember when I worked at United Talent Agency, that was like the big thing. Once you kind of got on a desk was how long does it take to connect the dots? It took me a little bit longer than I thought it was going to, but then once it clicked, it clicked. So DJ Waller, it sounds like it's clicked. The other one is Nickelback, Jaden McBurrows, and it sounds from what we heard today, he's really taking a leadership role. Every time anyone's asked who's that guy who's looked the most like he could fill in for Mikey Sainristil, McBurrows is the guy that gets that mention. We mentioned the other day. It makes sense that he would get that because that was the role he played when Mikey moved over to the outside corner position when there were some injuries there. So Those are 8 guys. I tried to think of more to try to fill us out more, but really these are the ones that get constant mention. So I think that's a good place to be because you have a lot of entrenched starter types, especially on defense who are returning. When we look at this, I mean, we do have, this is half and half. We've got 2 edge guys, 2 corners. And there's others that I could mention, Jaden Hood has gotten some mention. I don't count when it's like, Brian Jean-Marie mentions him on his own. But then I ask Ernie Hausman today, that doesn't count, right? It has to be like open-ended, and that's how they got up on the list here. So that's where we're at. All right, so we're going to continue on. I wanted to talk about, we'll talk about basketball in segment 3 because there's been kind of a lot happening there. And then but in the middle, we're going to talk about a Michigan coach who is going to Ohio State. Seemingly, they have no problem with that, although they are kind of expanding his legend to a point that makes no sense. So we'll get into all of that, and we're going to do it here in just a moment. But before we do, the sports calendar is absolutely loaded, and FanDuel is making it even more exciting to get in on the action. Because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. I've been telling you, just bet on the Detroit Tigers, right? They're the best team in Major League Baseball right now. We'll see how long that lasts. But it's $200 that you could use to bet the tourney, Major League Baseball. You got NBA and NHL playoffs coming up. Those are still in regular season for another month or so. But so much more. You got everything there for you. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet a big win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, let's continue on. So if you haven't heard, yesterday it was revealed that Ohio State is hiring a coach who used to spend some time in Ann Arbor as a new analyst, a quality control coach. So it's a little bit different than Michigan poaching Tony Alford or Ohio State poaching Greg Madison and Al Washington, because also those were direct, one sideline to the next sideline. And this one's had a little bit of a wayward go for things and is now going to be behind the scenes. This isn't something that's going to necessarily help because, yes, Tony Alford could certainly provide details as to what Ohio State wants to do up until about 3 weeks ago, right? So this is not someone that could tell you anything about what Sharon Moore wants to do because he has spent no time on the Michigan staff at the same time. I am talking about Tim Drevno, the former Michigan offensive coordinator and offensive line coach, who was summarily dispatched following the 2017 season and ended up at USC for a minute. And then he ended up at UCLA with Chip Kelly, which makes sense as to why he would end up at Ohio State. Now, fun fact about Tim Drevno, he, I don't know how many, if it was everybody, but he, the consensus, everyone says nice guy, and he is a nice guy. But I was kind of surprised that when he left, I saw that he had blocked me on Twitter, and I was like, what did I say? What did I do? I didn't say anything bad about Tim Drevno. But it turned out I wasn't the only one. I was talking to Nick Baumgardner at the 2018 Big Ten media days, and I remember him saying, he blocked me too, and there were like 3 other people, he blocked me too. I don't know if he blocked everyone. He just said, like, you know what, Michigan media, I don't want to hear anything, so I'm just going to block you all out. I just think that that's kind of a silly move. You never know when you're going to cross paths again or whatever, So it's funny. There are some coaches who follow me still on social media who weren't really in Ann Arbor for very long looking at UMO Linguist. I think it's wise to kind of keep the lines of communication open. Nonetheless, the funniest part of all of this to me is the way that Ohio State people, for the most part, not entirely, there are some people that know ball and look at this and they're like, I mean, at least it's a behind the scenes role, but some people look at it as like, oh, Justin Fry's job isn't safe. Listen, if Justin Fry doesn't do his job in the one game that he needs to do his job in, then Ryan Day's job is not safe, right? It's not. That's what it all comes down to. It's not like having an heir apparent there. Like, it doesn't matter if Ryan Day has single digit losses after his 8th year or whatever if he just continues to compile a losing record to Michigan. They're not going to let him continue to be John Cooper. But the funniest part is not just the development that they claim that Drevno has, because UCLA fans will tell you that they were very uninspired by what Drevno did with their offensive line. Pretty much the same thing could be said as well, although some things kind of had a little bit of an uptick with USC, but no one's really writing home about USC's offensive line and its run game, right? Like, there's a reason why it's a heavy quarterback, and wide receiver laden school. But the same, it was okay. I mean, obviously they had Zach Charbonnet. They had another guy whose name escapes me at the moment that were able to run. No, it's not either of those things that they're hanging their hat on. They are claiming that he is an incredible recruiter. Yeah, no, he is not an incredible recruiter. For all of the talk of Tony Alford that comes out of Columbus right now, saying like, oh, you're going to be sorry, not a good recruiter. Listen, what Tony Alford is doing right now, and this is not to disparage Mike Hart, is just speaking the truth of the matter of Mike Hart and recruiting. What Tony Alford is doing is already better than what Mike Hart essentially done outside of bringing in, I'm talking the recruiting trail, not talking about the on-field. We don't know that yet. But and it's hard to top what Mike did on-field. But what he has done so far is better than anything outside of Mike Hart bringing in actually getting Jordan Marshall. Now, if he gets any of those guys, especially Jordan Davison or Bo Jackson and Marquise, I can't remember his name, common occurrence on this show. Memory doesn't serve well. But if he gets, any of those three who are super highly touted and are all being very heavily pursued by Ohio State, then certainly that puts him already in the same category, if not better. Because Hart was not an avid recruiter, and Alford is. Tim Drevno, likewise, was not an avid recruiter. He did have some nice pulls, guys like Ben Bredesen, but it wasn't that, like, he was known just kind of like there were a couple guys that were on staff who, great coaches. I know that a lot of Michigan fans would kind of debate that on Tim Drevno. Like, he couldn't get out of town fast enough after only 3 years in Ann Arbor. Was certainly, looked at as being a kind of second fiddle to the pass game coordinator in any of his 3 years, whether it was Jed Fish or Pep Hamilton. And then, they even got someone to assist him with his job by bringing in Greg Fry in his last year, essentially, on the offensive line. But absolutely was he not a recruiter, right? There were some guys that just, they weren't, right? Harbaugh brought in an NFL-style staff. And that meant a lot of guys were not heavy recruiters. And I can tell you, based off of everyone that I talked to in the tenure, that Tim Drevno, wow, dying all of a sudden. Tim Drevno was at Ann Arbor. I'm going to power through. That he was not a guy who was particularly active on the trail. There were guys who certainly were, but there were guys who certainly weren't. And so that's funny. So here's my question finishing out this segment. Is it okay now if you're, because Ohio State fans loved when they took Greg Madison away from Michigan, but they hate the Tony Alford thing. So is it okay now, right, to have a guy who at another school, right, he, knows Jim Harbaugh personally, knows what Jim Harbaugh would do? He was with him from Stanford, San Francisco 49ers, Michigan, right? He was with him for a decade plus. Is it okay now? I think he was even with him at San Diego. So it's an Harbaugh acolyte going to Ohio State, which cannot make Jim Harbaugh particularly happy. But is it suddenly all right now? Because it's he might not know the inner workings as they currently exist, but he knows them in terms of what, if anyone could sit there and say, what would Jim Harbaugh do? He would probably be the closest to it. Now, Harbaugh's not around anymore, but is it okay now? That's the question I have. All right. I'm glad we powered through because now I can breathe again. All right. So let's talk a little basketball. There's been a bunch of little things that have happened. in the last 48-ish hours. So we are going to discuss that here in just a moment. But before we do, with all of these sports going on, you've got to find a way, because I know a lot of you are cutting the cable, or you haven't cut the cable and you want something supplementary. You don't have a smart TV, or you want an interface that is even better to use than a lot of smart TVs out there. Looking at you, Samsung. Your smart TV OS sucks. But Amazon Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV Stick, which you can plug into your existing TV, that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. As I said before, mentioned Samsung. I got Sarah a Samsung Frame TV. And I was like, look, I can set this all up and you don't have to plug in your Fire TV Stick. And she's like, no, I'm going to plug in my Fire TV Stick. And she did. So whether it's for opening weekend of baseball, which is ongoing, the college basketball tournament also ongoing, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. And you can count Locked On among that. So you also have a lot of the big pro leagues, college conferences, all of that. Fire TV channels lets you dive in a little bit deeper to all of the game analysis, highlights, and more, and you can keep up to date on all of the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, Major League Baseball, a lot more. Not to mention there's great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos, all of that. Again, I love the Curtis Stone show there. So check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, go to amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. All right, let's finish up with just a couple minutes of basketball. So Dusty May seems like he's got a couple guys who he is bringing in, and I have to look some stuff up because the name thing, again, my memory sucks, and I thought I could remember them until right this second, in which I realized. So Mike Boynton, who's one of them, I can tell you that. Oklahoma State, former Oklahoma State head coach. He is absolutely a huge pull to come in as an assistant. Obviously, he coached Cade Cunningham. He recruited Cade Cunningham. So getting to have, they get to share the state again. So that's exciting. But that is huge for him to join the Michigan staff. And it's exciting to see that he's able to recruit guys like that, essentially, to the coaching staff. Now, there's the other one, and I'm looking up. He's from Georgia. He spent 1 year at Georgia after spending several years with May at FAU, and that is Akeem Miskdeen. Okay, saying that correctly. Miskdeen. And as Anthony Broom points out, he was Conner's primary recruiter when he was recruiting him to Georgia. So that shows, again, Dusty May can at least recruit some guys. Now, the question is, who's the third? Could it be someone from FAU? Because we haven't heard that yet. Or could it be Saudi Washington? Because he got passed up for the Detroit Mercy job. I understand that a lot of people probably want to wash some of the stench off with the Juwan Howard stuff, but we've seen Saudi Washington do a really good job in the John Beilein era, who was with him for pretty much the majority of that. So I would be interested to see where he goes with the other one. Scholarship spots continue to dwindle. I should say they continue to open going the other way. Doug McDaniel commits to Kansas State, so he gone. And then today, Terrence Williams announces he's declaring for the NBA draft but keeping eligibility. And it's like, oh, so he could return to Michigan. Although the responses to my tweet about it indicate that people don't really want him back at Michigan. He's obviously been a little bit of a streaky player, but then it was revealed that he has also entered the transfer portal. So as I tweeted at someone, the Mac from It's Always Sunny gif, he likes to play both sides, so he always comes out on top, right? Like, because he could still come back to Michigan, but there's all these options essentially open to him. So there's that looks like he's gone, but Will Shetter announces he is returning. So you've got him, you've got Darrell Brooks, And you've got, I think, one other. I can't remember who it is, which is not saying much about where this Michigan basketball roster is at the moment. But yeah, so okay, Jace Howard is the other one that I couldn't forget. Oh, and Namari Burnett. So right now you're looking at Namari Burnett, Jace Howard, Will Shutter, and Darrell Fat Brooks as your guys. Now you could bring George Washington back potentially. He's amenable to it. Could you get Connie Ruth back? It kind of seems like that's kind of trending that way. And then you've got all the FAU guys who are kind of out there in the ether because that they had their big entry into the portal over the last 48 hours. So now Nick Boyd did not mention Michigan, so that's not great. But you've got everyone else that has entered the portal. Certainly Michigan has got to be an option. You've got the Yale center. You've got Connor Asigian. There's all kinds of options there, and that's kind of exciting, but it's also kind of scary. But then you add in the fact that Dusty is out there. Went to I think it was Connie Ruth's practice, and so he is actively recruiting him, and it is off to the races for him. Very clear that he is driven and motivated. So that's exciting to hear, and it's just kind of like Sharon Moore, right? And that we're going to end with a football note that's similar, and that is asked. I don't remember which player said it. Memory again, continuing to fail. But they had said today when asked, like, what's the difference between the Jim Harbaugh Wolverines? Oh, it was Ernest Hausman, the Jim Harbaugh Wolverines and the Sharon Moore Wolverines. And he's like, as far as the way this operation is run, it's exactly the same. Like, yeah, you're going to have some changes because there's personnel changes. So you're going to find ways to make things work, but it's the same operation. So different operation under Dusty Bay, but so far you're getting what's promised. Same operation in football, so you're getting what's promised. So that's good news all around. All right, we'll be back on Friday to discuss whatever the dominant news of the day is on Friday. So we will talk then. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will be back soon. Peace.